up and saying we've a right to fight for the right to work.
It was the last great battle of the organised industrial class.
And insofar as they use power, they must use it responsibly.
Today, the focus of the picketing by the striking miners moved to Scotland, and the focus of the police moved with them.
Our descendants will read about the miners' revolt of 1984.
In 1984, coal miners in Britain went on strike to defend their mines, their labour rights and their communities against a government more committed to economic than social responsibilities. Their defeat created a freer market but also contributed to inequality, reshaping government responsibilities and workers' rights to the present day. This is the story of the 1984 miners' strike in Britain.
For 2 centuries, coal was the driving force behind Britain's rise as an industrial superpower. It fueled the steam engines of the Industrial Revolution and powered the factories of the Second World War.
By the 1970s, the coal industry produced a third of Britain's electricity and employed 250,000 miners. Many still lived in towns and communities of families, schools, churches and shops sustained by the mining industry. Over 170,000 of these miners were members of the National Union of Mine Workers, or the NUM. During the post-war era, British labour unions were among the most powerful in the world. Many industries required union membership to be employed, and there were few restrictions on workers' rights to strike. With these rights, the NUM had organised strikes in 1969, 1972 and 1974 to demand higher wages, regularly restricting electricity and disrupting industry across the country. But in 1979, the Conservatives returned to power under a new leader who believed that prosperity could only come from a free market, and that economic growth was being shackled through constant strikes by overpowerful and irresponsible unions.
When one side has tremendous power, you wouldn't call that a position of even balance. And that's why I say the law has to be changed. And insofar as they use power, they must use it responsibly. So we call it responsible collective bargaining.
But while the unions were powerful, the coal industry was struggling due to rising production costs, cheaper imports, and the NUM's wage demands. Production had fallen 56% since 1913, and the government claimed that the state-owned mines were losing £275 million a year. Thatcher's government argued that it had a responsibility to ensure economic stability, even if that meant limiting labour rights. New laws prohibited sympathy strikes, required secret ballots before industrial action, and ended compulsory union membership for employment in certain industries.
I will never ever be a party to Tory party legislation which seeks to castrate and mutilate this trade union movement.
That was Arthur Scargill, the radical president of the NUM. The union was furious about the legislation and said that miners deserved the right to advocate for better wages. But this did not deter the government. In 1984, Ian McGregor, the newly appointed head of the government-controlled National Coal Board, made secret plans to shut down over 70 coal mines and lay off 60,000 workers, thus prioritizing economic responsibility over its social responsibility to protect mining communities.
I'm talking about the sons and daughters of miners who have a right to have a job in this industry. We're talking about our communities.
Mr. McGregor.
The only opportunity that these people will have in the future is to work in pits that are reasonably equipped and are reasonably efficient, and that's what I have promised to give the industry.
Tensions were high when, on March 1st, 1984, the National Coal Board suddenly announced that Cortonwood, a colliery in South Yorkshire, would be given 5 weeks to close. That Sunday, a meeting of its local NUM branch was called.
The decision was a unanimous one, that Corton would immediately take strike action.
On March 8th, the NUM Executive Committee voted to support striking Yorkshire and Scottish miners, officially starting the miners' strike. Union members of Flying Pickets travelled nationwide, rallying miners to join. Despite many arrests, they convinced most local unions to strike.
By late March, 142,000 miners were striking across Britain, picketing their former workplaces. Even miners whose pits were not directly threatened by closures went on strike, for the strike of 1984 was fundamentally different from previous strikes.
It's because it wasn't about pay and conditions, it was about the preservation of a job and de facto the preservation of a particular way of life. And when you close that mine, the community starts to fragment and disappear. So that's where the slogan, close a coal mine, kill a community, comes from. That mining was more than a source of employment, it was a way of life.
Starting within mining communities, the strike turned into a broader social and political movement. Women's support groups and civil rights organizations mobilized to fundraise for the miners. Most notably, lesbians and gays support the miners. These groups are supporting the miners' strike as their responsibility, as part of a larger fight against a government determined to curtail their civil rights.
Because every right that you and I have been fought for, and they've been fought for against unjust laws.
As 20,000 marched through London in support of the miners, the government became increasingly concerned. Officials portrayed the strike as an irresponsible action led by a violent minority infringing on the rights of miners wishing to work.
And we must watch out for it, because they're not true representatives of the majority, and sometimes they deny the majority the right to speak because they know they won't support the tiny minority.
Strikebreakers, miners who continued to work during the strike, were branded as scabs. They often faced violence from miners on strike and needed to be escorted in police vans to the pits. Miners who opposed the strike were especially common in areas such as Nottinghamshire, where the regional union voted against striking.
However, apart from tapping union leaders' telephones and subverting courts to prosecute miners, the government also neglected its social responsibility to protect civil liberties, condoning widespread police violence, most notably at the Orgreave coking plant in Yorkshire. On June 18th, anticipating picketers would block coal transport, the police deployed 6,000 officers with horses and riot gear. As the pickets advanced, the chief ordered a mounted charge against them. With the government refusing to take responsibility for the violence, the Battle of Orgreave was a pivotal moment in the miners' strike.
And we see the full force of the state there. It seems quite clear that the state is willing to invest vast amounts of resources in order to defeat the strike.
As the strike dragged on through the winter of 1984, miners began to run out of money, with many breaking the strike and drifting back to work. Finally, the National Union of Mine Workers conceded to the government on March 3rd, 1985.
The National Union of Mine Workers shall organize a return to work on Tuesday.
The defeat of the miners' strike strengthened the government's resolve to place economic responsibilities over labour rights. Over the next few years, a weakened NUM could not prevent further pit closures, costing 100,000 miners their jobs. By failing to implement policies to help them transition to new industries, the government also neglected their social responsibility to the miners. The defeat also reflected a global weakening of labour rights, such as in the United States, where the Reagan administration broke up an air traffic controllers strike. After the end of the strike, with the restrictive employment acts having created a more flexible labour market, Britain experienced an economic boom, followed by 2 decades of consistent economic growth. However, with workers lacking strong unions to advocate for fairer wages, the benefits of this growth were unevenly distributed, leaving metropolitan and upper-income groups better off than others. In particular, new industries failed to take root in former mining communities. Today, these communities are some of the poorest areas in Britain.
The effect on the coal fields, there's above average levels of unemployment, there's above average levels of poverty. The long-term impact has been kind of severe, and it's still being felt in those communities.
Today, the miners' strike has remained divisive, with the government still denying responsibility for police violence during the strike. In the long term, now that British economic growth has slowed down once more, the effects of this increased inequality have deepened, and the workforce, now only a quarter unionized, face serious issues.
You've got low wages, low skills, and rising levels of inequality. And I think in some ways, you can trace this back to the defeat of the miners' strike at the end of 1985.
The 1984 miners' strike was the last major industrial action in Britain, and its defeat weakened labour rights, with the government prioritising economic over social responsibility. Its defeat marked a decisive break from the post-war consensus of strong labour rights, leading to Britain's shift towards a more free market economy, bringing growth but also increased inequality.
But the tide may be turning. Recent years have seen a global resurgence in labour unions, especially among younger workers.
So here we are again, another Tory government, another attack on the fundamental human right to strike.
As they regain influence, we must ask, what rights must workers reclaim to protect their jobs and resist inequality, as the miners tried to do in 1984? And how should future governments balance social and economic responsibilities to prevent injustice?